Buongiorno a tutti.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today's meeting, like all the meetings, is an opportunity for listening, for judging the culture that surrounds us, and this is why the topic that has been chosen is the topic of justice and free service provision. Free service provision and justice. And this is a topic that implies being present not just in a private setting, but in life, like all lives, is private but also public, life open to all and present to all. Our two guests this afternoon will talk about these two great topics, and we will be listening with gratitude and with interest because their role is to help us to study in depth a topic which touches all of us and which has come to resound in the halls of the meeting this year, looking at the center and at the periphery and at the possibility of understanding better ourselves, who we are, our world, existence, and our destiny. I shall just briefly introduce this dialogue and then introduce our guests who are ready to talk to us, making a few considerations on the cultural historical moment we are experiencing at the present time and of which we are all to some extent victims. The modern world, says Heidegger, is one of total interchange. Everything becomes malleable, everything becomes available and feasible and turn and buyable, not with indifference but on difference, because difference, Chesterton would say, the single thing is something that cannot be reduced, something I cannot take possession of. There are facts which interrogate us, and faced with facts we have two possibilities. We can either gratitude or resentment, and often modern society resentment wins over gratitude, whereas Peggy, listening to Peggy speak, we have seen how he, the great poet, is the poet of facts, of events, before whom the only possible feeling is one of gratitude. Nowadays, instead, we often emphasize rights rather than duties, as we will hear, because to some extent, having rights eludes man from being in a position of strength, to be able to claim something. Whereas acknowledging a gift means acknowledging that there is someone who gives a gift and someone to whom you are in debt, to whom you must give. You must acknowledge a greatness outside yourself. So how can we enter into this great alternative? It cannot be taken for granted, and it's no coincidence that we are here at the meeting to learn about this. It cannot be taken for granted, and I think this is the attitude to have at the moment. It's as if we were perplexed, curious, and doubtful about whether this alternative has anything to do with us. And in fact, we have learnt from the exhibition on the Explorer that this is telling us that we have not learnt everything, that this is an interesting path to take and can fill our hearts. So we will be talking about the current client, the facts which are questions and which force us to delve into ourselves, into what we want to be. And we will be doing this with our today's guests, President Violante, who, in addition to the single items on his CV, he is a teacher, a mentor for many things. We have read his texts on justice in many crucial times during the history of Italy, the Moro affair and other events, where Violante represents a firm position looking at the truest dimension of man. He has been the president of the Chamber of Deputies. He is a professor of criminal law. His background bears testimony to all of us. Then we will also talk with Javier Prades. Here again, he is very well known for his curriculum, and summarizing, I would just say that he is currently Chancellor of the San Dámaso University in Madrid, a university which is expanding in different parts of the world, in Africa and in Central and Southern America. He has helped us over the years at the meeting to study aspects of theology, but explaining these topics from the slant of his religious experience, which marks all of us, because on many occasions we are imbued with theory, but we often feel that our humanity leaves room for action. So our guests will talk today on the topic that I have already presented, public life as the venue for justice and service free of charge. Not always will public life characterized by these aspects. So I would ask President Violante, who was to some extent the inspiration for this topic and asked for the meeting to insert this topic. Therefore, we would like to ask him his thought, his views on this topics, what he was thinking when he asked us to put this topic in service free of charge together with trust. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your invitation. First of all, I think we should reflect on the fact that the condition of Italy is not very different from the situation in many European countries. We are all in the same setting with the same guidelines. And what are the guidelines that I would like to draw your attention to this afternoon? This is because financial capitalism and its laws are increasingly assuming a function of a guide in lives which until recently were guided by morality, religion, and politics. The idea is prevailing in our lives that everything can be negotiated and that everything has a price. I'll give you two examples to explain what I mean. The first stems from a recent decision of the United States High Court to do with a law that any corporation, any enterprise in the United States can fund when it wants. It can finance and sponsor a political party or a politician without any limit. This means basically that politics is in the hands, or risks being in the hands of financial capitalism, with companies sponsoring politics and politicians. So there's no separation between capitalism and the national community. The second example concerns a talk at the Festival of Economy in Trento, which is held every year. The Nobel Prize winner by Farden, and well-known economist, a Nobel Prize winner, said that politicians should be paid, but I propose that we follow the mechanism that's used in corporations. So in the regional councils and in Parliament, as if it were the board of directors of a company, and the president, mayor, and regional director are the directors and members of the board. So the shareholders say to the board of directors say to the president, if you manage to manage well, we will increase your salary with a bonus. If you go beyond these objectives, then you will receive even greater bonuses. His suggestion was to act as if Parliament and public life was a private company. This is based on a very different premise than the idea of entering into politics, because a private corporation works in the interests of its shareholders, whereas political activity is related to the country as a whole, those who agree and those who don't agree. They are pursuing the common good, and we will go into this later, and as we discuss the topic of free service provision. So when everything can be negotiated, what happens is that people are led to move based on personal ambition, on selfish criteria, and the social links among people are broken. Social links are based on sympathy, values, and mutual respect. In actual fact, these processes have moved forward more than elsewhere, firstly due to political instability. As Professor Prades will tell you, in 2011, the current government is in power from December 2011, whereas in Italy we've had 3 governments since then, Monti, Letta, and now Renzi. Each government had its own political strategy, legitimated by the members of parliament, but each strategy was different from the one before, and it will be different from the next government. So this creates a problem of stability in the country and in society. The country does not feel orientated, it doesn't feel that it is guided or run by a political class. So this is what I was thinking when I took the liberty of suggesting this particular topic for a meeting, along with the topic of free service provision, because I would like to reflect with you on my personal conviction that we can negotiate over many things. We can give up many things, we can renounce many things, but a person, a family, or a nation cannot save itself unless it determines what cannot be sold and what cannot be compromised, what cannot be bought and sold. And each of us in the world, should every now and again ask, what am I not prepared ever to buy or to sell? And I am asking this mainly to the younger generations, because if there is something, then we can start from there to rebuild a system of values. If there is nothing that any of us is not willing to buy or sell, then there is a point of rupture in the humanity of people. So I think that on this point we need to return to the concept of free provision of service, of no charge, because this will limit the possibility of endless negotiation. And this will allow us to rebuild a hierarchy of values in our society, which I think is what is most missing. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. So if this is the way things are going, as you clearly illustrated, well, how comes that there is a sort of commodization of ideals and values? I mean, apparently we are ready to do everything to reach and achieve our purposes. Well, sometimes we have the impression that we are in a world where nothing is given for free. That given for free is considered like a non-virtuous. And sometimes we are a bit ashamed in stressing the importance of giving things for free. The floor to Javier Prades. Thank you very much. We are here to speak about justice and things which are given for free. I'd like to start by thanking Emilia for inviting me here to address you and to be once and again here with you in a place which I can call home. Thank you very much, Mrs. Violini, and thank you very much, President Violante. He's the one who's proposed this title, which I really like very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this discussion. And I'm really grateful and proud. Well, how comes that we do not like doing things for free? Apparently, this is, in a way, profitable. We should concentrate on the perils implied in losing this attitude to life. I'll try to provide my anthropological cultural interpretation to further widen up our horizons. I would like to propose at least two elements. One, brutally said, is the experiencing of evil. One of the reasons why we, each one of us, or our fellow citizens, the other members of the human family in the Western world, is because we are indeed not able to, to trust the others because we suffered. Suffering and death has always been there in the history of humanity. Indeed, the magnitude and the severity of evil things we've witnessed in the past century and which we are experiencing live in these days do have an impact on the way we perceive reality and life. In particular, of the idea of giving things for free. Apparently, the world we see outside, which has been briefly described by Mr. Violante, it's not reconcilable with the idea that life is good, that we can receive things without maybe deserving them and being grateful for that. Maybe we are not able to consider the attitude of giving for free as something reasonable. We cannot deny that it has interesting effects, but might seem an utopia or something naive. So we think that nothing can be given for free. So we think that it's something which is done to have something back. So there should be someone who tell us how things really are. So what is real around us is not what is given for free, and there are other ways of living which really exclude the idea of giving for free. So it's indeed a very wide issue. Speaking about doing justice for free in this world will make us come to terms with the real conditions in which we are. That is something which heavily implies this factor. There is a second element which has very old and complex roots. I try to put it simply. With reference to the first comments I made, in the Western world in particular, for legal and philosophical as well as theological reasons, we tend to reject the idea of things given for free because we are entitled to have everything. So we want to exclude the fact to be dependent from others, because that would be apparently against the real dignity of an adult. The fact of being debtor to someone for something which we have not deserved or gained. To put it bluntly, probably this attitude, which indeed has some practical implications in our daily lives, in a way or the other, we all are part of this mentality, which might take its roots far back in our philosophical, cultural environment in the West. Just as an example, think that at the root of our public law thought, there is the idea of a social covenant, which implies a number of values which I'm not questioning, but which indeed are really influential. We created the theory concerning the way in which we live together is based on a contract or a covenant stating that the person, the human being, has two types of freedom. One is the personal one, and the second is its relationship with the others, i.e. Public freedom. That was indeed very good in terms of making our civilization progress. Still, we might rethink or explain in a different way the rules of living together in this world. We can rethink that without abandoning the ideas of the liberal conservative thinking in the West. We might, borrow from other schools of thought, which might be useful to better understand what you said when mentioning the persons, the families who are both public and private subjects. So we might have a different way of thinking. These are just some provocative ideas. We might also think of theology, modern theology. There are in particular two issues to theories which are indeed well understood, but which might have influenced the idea that if you live depending from someone who has given you something for free is not convenient. I mean, it would take ages to explain it in details, but some thinkers thought that in order to well defend the dignity of human beings or theology should speak of what is called pure nature of human beings. What is it? It is what a person is regardless of its free connection with God. That was done for very clear historical reasons. That was conceived of to say that human beings have their own dignity. But because of that, throughout the history of Catholic thinking, we might have been brought to think that the autonomy of human beings is, in a way or the other, absolute. So theologians had elaborated this idea. Which is technically complex, but still our culture might be rooted in that thinking. So we are thinking of human beings who are fully autonomous, who owe nothing to no one, and that they are fully independent. Just think of another category, i.e. Merit. If I were to make a sort of survey, sorry, I am a professor, so I tend to do these things. If I were to ask you as students to tell me what merit is, what is the meaning of merit for Catholics? What do we deserve? What do we merit from God? I think that we had many answers saying merit, merit means that I do the right things and God rewards me for that. So in a way, it's a very deep confusion in the relationship with God. So I do something good, so I gain something for that. It's like putting coins in the piggy bank, and then God awards me for that. Again, this is a sort of contractual approach. I mean, the relationship with God is like a contract. I did something good, and so you reward me. So I spend my life gaining or doing good things in front of God because I will be rewarded for that. So, indeed, there is no thing given for free which is not supported by the free initiative of God. We should bear in mind that if evil is in our lives, that is really fatiguing, and that has a bad impact on our thinking. Our theological and legal history, for a number of reasons, has always favored the idea of a self-made man, the person who gained things because of his or her own merits. So he or she could not be the subject of receiving gifts. This has something to do with the idea that we have of the image of God. In the secularization process, and God disappears, in the end, God remains only when there is no one else to be blamed. We can no longer blame parents or the family or the society at large or the government. So in the end, we'll blame God. I'm impressed by the words Samuel Beckett, who used to say, Dieu il n'existe pas. Le salope. That means God does not exist, that stupid. because indeed, if God did exist, he would be, there to listen to our, insults. So it's the primeval relationship and the way we interpret them which are important.
Ecco che vediamo due diverse analisi che però ci spiegano tante cose che noi percepiamo, che magari inconsapevolmente anche viviamo, quanto la mia generazione ha vissuto del merito, non te lo meriti, o quante volte ce lo siamo sentito dire dai genitori, e se fai qualcosa di buono hai fatto solo il tuo dovere. No, ecco, questo, con tutta la gratitudine ai nostri genitori, è qualcosa che ci resta dentro, ci segna e ci allontana un po' da quello slancio libero e entusiasta, no? Che ci consente di dare senza calcolare. Ma allora, Presidente Violante, ci ha sfidato su questo tema, come andiamo avanti a discuterne?
Ma io vorrei riprendere una parte del ragionamento che ha fatto il professor Prades sulla gratuità. Guardate, non c'è parola forse più carica di ambiguità di questo termine. Cosa vuol dire gratis? Gratis vuol dire che fai una cosa senza...
It means doing something without asking for a price. A gratuitous insult or a gratuitous action means without a reasonable motivation. But gratuity also means something else. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, there is a moment where Jesus ordered the disciples to go out into the world, and the phrase that Jesus uses is free of charge, free have you received, and free should you give. What does free of charge here mean? Does it mean without charging, without who would have paid the apostles? Would it have been God? Would it have been Jesus? Freely given, what does that mean? Does it mean that you must give without asking a price? But what price can you ask for a prayer? So starting from this line of the Gospel of St. Matthew, we can reflect on what free and gratuitous means. Free of charge means an act has no price or payment outside itself, but whose value is explained in itself. I do this because it's the right thing to do. I do this because I believe in it. I'm doing this because I think that my religion imposes on me to do so. Or there is a lay commitment because the political values in which I believe impose on me to do this, but not because I have to have something in exchange. So gratuity, free service, has the free act is in itself so full of value that it goes beyond the act itself because it expresses an act that lies above it, either a lay value or a religious value. So why is free service provision necessary? Because we need to draw confines on the market. Either you do this or we will do it, not because there is a price, but because there is no price, because I believe in it. Gratuity requires trust in others as a sign of others, a value in which we believe through our actions. This capacity of trusting and having values is a component of free service provision, is part of the topic that we've been discussing today. Then there is another issue that Professor Violini mentioned, and that is the question of duty. For how long is it that there no authority in Italy, or this is a more general problem, that has said, look, you don't just have rights, you also have duties, public duties and private duties. We must not trust those who only talk about rights. Rights need to be flanked by duty. Because there is no democracy without rights, but a democracy will be spoiled if there are only rights and no duties. Because there is an equilibrium between rights and duties. And I think that we, as a national community, in the broadest possible sense, I think we need to have the capacity to grasp this topic of rights, not to pose restrictions, but because we need to be aware that a world only of rights is a world that doesn't exist. It's the world of prevarication. Brandishing rights will only damage human relations. What keeps society together is the balance between rights and duties. So, as was mentioned earlier, the point on justice, justice can rebalance, but in itself, justice cannot correct. What is justice? You have done this, so therefore this evil will require so much evil back to establish an equilibrium. But correction must be done by someone else. Here again is the concept of conciliation between who has made a mistake towards the community and rectifying that mistake. Who does this? Is it the judges? Is it the courts? Or is it somewhere else? After apartheid finished in South Africa, a mechanism was tested called Truth and Reconciliation. What happened was that as there were evil, heinous crimes had been committed on both sides, with Bishop Desmond Tutu, a hypothesis was devised where they went into the villages, and those who had committed crimes admitted them spontaneously. They would confess their crimes over and above punishment or condemnation. And this was sufficient to close the question. You admitted the truth of what had come about. So now reconciliation will take place. And that was sufficient. Many countries have tried to follow this route. Some have managed it, some haven't. But I think this is an important example to understand how conciliation and reconciliation cannot be demanded of the justice system, but it is part of the mechanisms of free service provision of humanity. Are belongs to the community. How can we rebuild a community? A community is a pool of people who are reconciled to each other. And if this social bond has been severed with a crime, then that person must be punished, but then we must activate a mechanism of reconciliation. The Bible uses the word conciliation, reconciliation. This is all linked in with gratuity and free service provision. I will be reconciled to my aggressor. Reconciliation is free of charge. It has value with respect to everything else. And around these issues, I think we ought to reflect more often in Italy and around the need for each of us, for each of us to reconstruct the thread linking the values in which you believe in and the free service provision and duties and service to others. I think through this thread, our country and other countries, but obviously we're talking about Italy here today, the route of civilization, the route through which a country can rediscover its ideals, its social progress, its values and solidarity. This is extremely important because making merchandise of everything needs to be stopped as a trend so that we can resume our guide of civilization of our society. And in this setting, free service provision and the sense of duty are extremely important.
Ma forse quando abbiamo
Well, I must confess that when reading the title, Public Life, Justice and Free Service Provision, were in a way 3 points and not 2. What's emerging in our debate is that apparently there is no gap between the two terms. And thank you very much, Luciano, for this, because this is something that we have to state with great energy in this country and to ourselves. Combining the two things, we indeed understand that the two things are united, that they have a deep link. And if the link is broken, that could be very harmful. Well, indeed, this is the first time maybe that we are able to acknowledge that, and we should continue the discussion along that lines. Professor Prades, let's try and understand why there is no gap and there is continuity between these two words. And how comes and when was that link broken? Was that link present in our history? Anyway, this will be the third round of the table. So why justice and free provision are so closely linked? I think that these are two dimensions of the human basic experience. They are two basic needs of the heart. As for justice, we can come back on that later. I'd like to start by speaking of the free provision. I like when Professor Violante said that there is a sort of a surplus of value, something which is self-explanatory. We need to understand that giving for free is a way of accomplishing ourselves, because that means that we have the right tools to live it in the right way and also to better understand it. What is that? This is something which starts from a very simple thing, which I'll try to explain you by mentioning the text of a song which I heard for the first time a few months ago. I'm sure you. It's by Giorgio Gaber. It speaks about the highway in the morning. And it states, I'm there looking outside the window, and I just need to have a small light or see a landscape and I feel good. I don't know whether that's convenient for me, but I'm fine. What a shame. I'm happy here, right here. It's not my fault if this happens to me. And I'm happy. I don't know why. I don't know what it is. So let's start from that. I mean, how we perceive reality, to see whether these things are real or not. I mean, maybe many of us drive 1 hour and a half every morning. Do you think that we can share the mood of Giorgio Gaber or not? So what is this gratuity? It starts right from there. There is nothing more necessary. We need not to add something. We simply have to be able to appreciate that there is this surplus which generates this irrational happiness. It is the structure of reality which is there. It's this structure, this reality which opens our hearts and fill our hearts with happiness. Well, gratuity is possible because it's real, because there are examples like this. There are people who can be happy. We might also look for similar cases and examples in conditions of suffering and because of the presence of evil, which is the great adversary of gratuity. So there can be people who had to suffer, to be humiliated, to go through terrible conditions, as it happened to many in the 20th century, for example, concentration camps. Well, these people, notwithstanding that, they were able to see that living is something good which fills your heart. I read a wonderful poem by Kertész, the Nobel Prize from Hungary, but we might also read pieces by Etty Hillenshoem, who has an incredible perception of life, notwithstanding the Nazi persecution, or Edith Stein, Maximilian Kolbe, many persons who make us understand what is this structure of reality which cannot be cancelled, even if in the worst of conditions. Starting from our experience or from the things that we see in the lives of others, if something is not reasonable, is not humane, we might imagine a world where there is no gratuity. What would be the world if there were no gratuity? Sometimes when we are angry, when we resent something, we think that we are, in a way, the victims of something else. But just think if we could have all human beings being in the same mood, and that the world is terrible. What would be like thinking that behind any gratuitous gesture there is something beyond or hidden, so things which are apparently given for love or for free or as a gift are not, because we are able to say that that is not the case. Nothing is given as a gift. Nothing is given for free. Those who think like that would live in a world of nightmares or dreams. Whereas the real world would be the world where any goodwill is a delusion or is a false. Any form of reception, of help, solidarity or love would be simply being cheated in a very cruel way. Starting from those who are here, people working here, those whose children or parents or friends or partners are like cheaters. So any form of gratitude would be cheating. So that would mean, or be tantamount, being totally dead, because we will no longer have the opportunity to live with the others in peace. That would mean absolute solitude, loneliness, or personal death. The only possible relationship as such, said, is holding or getting possession of the others by destroying them.
Se uno potrebbe deridere Gaber.
One might laugh at Giorgio Gaber because he was a singer, a poet, a dreamer. He is favorably impressed by the sun in the morning. Just think of yourself, your relationship, and what you will be doing tonight or tomorrow by thinking that everything is false. I mean, I'm sure that your mind would not stand that idea. How can we pursue gratuity or doing things for free? Just think of the examples where this love, this ability has happened to us through our friends, parents. Just think of those people who give their lives to save the life of another one. There are many examples of that. I think that we cannot, acknowledge full gratuity if we are not able to understand that that should be an attitude of living. It's not simply thanking someone for what they've given to us. The idea of giving for free can only be fully grasped if this is really part of your attitude towards a reality, which means living as a person who might be able to give things for free. It's like the joy of Giorgio Gaber, which might seem illogical, but indeed which is really real. But again, let's not forget what is evil. This attitude can stand aggression. If you are positive or you are a person who can trust others, you are available to build something with other persons, you can really survive the scandal of evil things. There are very well educated people in Europe who, like Habermas, said, we as lay people should be able to indeed to go back to great personalities that have disappeared. I realize that I made evil things to innocent persons. I cannot change my past. So what's left to me? And he said, and I'm very impressed, still we have the nostalgia for resurrection. I don't know what he means, but I think that Wittgenstein and Anna Arendt wrote along the same lines. I mean, my impression is that many great European thinkers spoke about nostalgia of the others or of the mystery, which also implies nostalgia for the evil perpetrated against the innocents and which cannot be reversed. So the issue of giving things for free or a free provision, well, should us push us to think whether there is a source somewhere of a force which is so strong to give things for free, which could help us to go beyond the terrible tragedies of humanity, i.e. realizing that you perpetrated terrible evils, and this is something which cannot be reversed. I mean, the Christians contributed to the legal and political processes which indeed make appeal to the existence of a special man who can indeed rescue humanity from the evils which were perpetrated in the past. The Easter Eve liturgy, the Exalted, states that indeed being born again is something good, because they have the possibility to be reborn. So I think that they will have indeed this perspective of the future, whereby we can learn to go beyond the borders.
Ma cosa cazzo ha detto? Ma questo è andato di qua, di là, cioè non si è capito nulla.
Riprendere e rafforzarci nella domanda sul tema della giustizia, che è quello che noi abbiamo di fronte, questa nostra grande domanda.
To resume on the question of justice, I would just like to read a few words. This morning, I woke up with happiness in my heart and a deep desire to better understand this, what is investing my heart every day. I got out of bed and made my coffee. Then I put the coffee pot underneath the tap to cool it down. We no longer have taps with handles, but pressure taps that automatically regulate the flow. So there's a lot of pressure, so the coffee pot couldn't fill up with water. So I shifted it slightly, and then the coffee pot filled up. And then he goes on saying, often that's what it's like in life. If you shift just slightly, if our company can help us shift what seems to be an intrusion becomes abundance. So, Stefan, I think we have the tools to live, but not life. We have the ability to live in the temple, but we lack the temple. Everything we can live, but we possess nothing at all. These and other things come from a person in prison who committed those deeds that Prades mentioned earlier, an irrevocable gesture, because murder has no possibility of being redressed, of being rebalanced. It is something that can either be pardoned or recognized as truth or experienced in a reconciliation process, or there is no possibility of going back to the primary origin. There is no possibility of redemption and therefore innocence. But in our experience, now and then, retributive justice can also give rise to an aperture to recognition and reconciliation as a process of free provision of service. So to conclude this part, let us move forward reflecting on this justice and its relationship over and above retribution in relation to gratuity. So it would be nice if President Violante, from his long experience as a judge and then as a politician, explained to us how the Italian people have experienced these events, because the letter that I read was a recent example. The history of Italy, the history of the Italian people currently in difficulty, does it have great moments within it in which it was possible to experience justice and gratuity for public life and help us to rediscover them today and to regain trust and energy? Yes, I think that we can cite historical examples to the idea of keeping the country together and reconciled has overcome the egotistical desires of one side and the other. For example, immediately after the construction of freedom in Italy, there was an amnesty signed by the Keeper of the Seal, Togliatti, that caused outrage because there was an amnesty for crimes committed during the struggle for liberation, those who still belong to the fascist forces, and on the other side, the partisans. So Togliatti was against this. There was even social revolt against this amnesty in certain towns. But it was passed just the same because the idea of cohesion, peace and unification prevailed. A short time later, there was an electoral law in 1953 called the Cheats Law. But this law, this electoral law, did not pass for a few thousand votes. So the Prime Minister De Gasperi was solicited to recount the votes because there were hundreds and thousands of blank ballot sheets. So it was thought that the conflict could be overcome by recounting the votes. But De Gasperi replied that we won't do a recount because the unity of the country, peace throughout the country, is more important. So these are the two major examples from two different sides that spring to mind, where unification and peace was deemed superior to the egotistical needs of each political side. More minor examples spring to mind. For example, during the years of terrorism, those of you who are no longer young will remember these years. We passed laws which were very severe against terrorists and those involved in terrorist acts. And prisoners condemned for these crimes asked to discuss amongst themselves, although they were imprisoned in different prisons, they wanted to discuss the experience of terrorism because they realized there had been something profoundly wrong and they wanted to discuss it amongst themselves. And they asked to be put together. Obviously, there was some concern about this because these people were terrorists, criminals, and the idea of putting them together for a discussion. But the political view prevailed that this was the right idea, that even though these people had been convicted of serious crimes, they were entitled to discuss and debate on the error of their ways. And they were authorized, and this was called a homogeneous area in which these criminals were allowed to discuss their past. And this was a victory for Italian democracy. It was nothing to do with justice. It was to do with conciliation. The state recognized the possibility without asking for anything in exchange because it had no idea how this discussion would end. It could have ended in a revolt. But it was decided, the politicians at that time decided that this could be done. And it was necessary to give these people the possibility of discussing their past evil acts. And this was important because we were the only country that had experienced terrorism in which very many of those convicted of acts of terrorism then repented. I'm not talking about the officially repented criminals. What I'm talking about are those who acknowledged that they had made a mistake. And this was a strong moment, a moment of strength in the history of the Republic, because battles are won not through coercion, but through persuasion. When you have the tools to make the other understand the error of his ways and allow him the tools to recognize this. I said this because before I referred to a non-religious dimension of gratuity. The 2,000 boys and girls who are acting as volunteers at this meeting, why are they doing that? It's because they believe in this. It's because they trust a set of values that this community expresses, and they think that it's the right thing to do. They recognize in their gesture, in their free provision of service, a value, and this has also happened to me because Lorenza made a personal mention during the years when I was concerned with mafia and with terrorism. My political party gave me an armed guard, and these were clerical workers or workers. One was a plumber, and they had stopped working, and they would get in the car and come and pick me up in Naples, Milan, Turin, wherever I was. They would come and pick me up and take me home or take me somewhere safer depending on the circumstances. And then they would come back, they would go home to their own homes and sleep a few hours, and next day they would go to work. Some of their names I've forgotten. They became friends. What was this? It was a free provision of service. It wasn't done for me as a person. It was done because they thought it was the right thing to do. So this is the secular dimension of gratuity. I think one of the key points in the crisis of politics in Italy is because we have lost the concept of militancy. In a political party of the center, left, or the right, because one believes in those values. The belief in those values I identify with those values and they help me to construct my political identity. When these values are no longer there, and the formation of a political identity on the basis of gratuity is a sign of weakness in a political organization. So I think that for this reason, we must resume this, we must re-embrace this principle, referring to Machiavelli and commenting. Machiavelli said, the relationship is between citizens and the law. As good customs to be maintained require laws, laws to be complied with require good customs. So what I mean is that often when we talk about public order, safety, security and justice, we constantly refer to laws. Our vision is essentially one of legislating our lives. Laws are important. We are currently making the reforms. They are necessary, but we also need conduct, behavior. There are institutions, but then there is society, and society too must do its part. No one can say it is up to someone else. And in this dimension, good customs, good habits consist in good behavior which make laws effective, because if no one abides by the law, then it's no point in writing them. I found another expression from an English thinker in more modern terms saying, the rules of civil society are impossible without the rules of morality among its individual members. We need regulations, institutions, and so forth, but we also require moral rules among its citizens. Because I think that gratuity is part of this value when we talk about democracy, when we talk about community, when we talk about behaviors that tend to build peace, then in my modest opinion, this isn't just a question of regulations and laws. There is a question of behavior and conduct. We need to be active participants, not just spectators. Democracy requires players, not just fans. People who are committed. Only dictatorships have passive citizens. Democracies require active citizens. And gratuity, free provision of service, is such because there is a value and not because there is a price. And this is a key value of a democratic society.
Non è facile, non è usuale.
Well, it's pretty uncommon to break this link, compliance with the law and implementation of justice. This is a link that we have to preserve, but should not be approached in absolute terms. Sumus ius, summa injuria. Now, I'd like to ask some conclusive remarks from our guests so that we indeed have new ideas so that we can have a better interpretation of what's happening around us. Can you tell us something about justice? I mean, we have just realized that there are many legal and political implications if we indeed implement a less rigorous justice. We might also think of the encyclical letter Caritas in Veritate. We have to restore the idea of doing things a free provision of service in politics. So what are the impacts of adopting this approach of a free provision of service in politics? The value of a pre-political value of democratic systems. A democracy cannot formally survive if the values mentioned by President Violante are not continually relaunched, recovered in a lively way, so that our society is composed of people who have ideals. I mean, if ideals are not there, our societies will never be saved. That's why we need to encounter people, what they do, and visit the places where this type of life is already lived, and it's a reality. We need to meet the people we mentioned today, i.e. those who are in politics at a very high level. My heart fills with hope whenever I see the examples which were mentioned, and if I think of the great personalities in the history of Europe who cannot be forgotten. Just think of what one of my brothers has been a foster father of a girl who has brain damage. Just think of what he did and how that changed his life. I mean, we trust each other, so if you allow me, I'd like to close by mentioning an old movie which I like very much, by Clint Eastwood, Unforgiven. Was the title in English. There is a ferocious gangster who has killed many persons. He is really ferocious. And then he fell in love with a woman. He married and had 2 children, and then he retired. And he decides to kill a couple of persons to gain money and flee away because his wife has died. And that former gangster states, I'm different, become a different person. She changed me. And he repeats that many times, even if the actions he does are really inconsistent with what he says. He is ferocious, he kills again, and then flees away with the children. At the end, And it finally appears that the evil wins. A writing comes out, and the mother of the dead wife, after some years, visited the farm where the bandit and the wife and the children had lived. And that lady found nothing explaining why her daughter, so refined, could have chosen to share her life with a murderer who indeed tries to reconstruct his life elsewhere. And I hope that we all might feel the presence which cannot be explained, someone who decides to share his or her life with us so that we are radically changed. Thank you.
Just two very short points, because our guests have further commitments. The first is that, having talked about all this, we can now take part in this task, because it seems to me that what we've been talking about this afternoon, if we reflect on these, we can find them, many of them, through the meeting. I'm thinking of the poems of Peggy, the exhibition on science. There are many things that are present here and that make us understand that the concept of gratuity is ours, and we will embrace this concept. And I hope that this experience will move forward, and that this year's proposal will participate in what is called the community meeting. And participation is very simple in helping the meeting to survive. We all know that there is a shortage of resources. If we help the meeting, not just now, but during the year, I think this is already an important gesture to make sure that at least something of gratuity, free service provision this world will have, because this experience is a major experience of conciliation and gratuity. Secondly, let me conclude with a very short quotation from the life of Don Giussani, who gave everything for us. In the 90s, he spoke of justice, and of the many things he wrote, he said that human justice cannot but be partial. It's impossible for it to entertain and save all factors around judgment. So that paradoxically, when we insist on justice, we carry out injustice. But this does not mean we should discard human justice, because men do everything they can. But they do everything they can if they are aware they cannot do everything, and that they are humble. And this will give man peace and courage without presumption. Thank you, and I thank my guests for their contributions. Thank you very much.